everyone. Hello, beautiful nerds. My name is Monty Paulson. I lead the Passive House team at RDH Building Science. I am happy to see all of you. It is my privilege to welcome you to the Global Passive House Happy Hour hosted by Passive House Accelerator. This is an inclusive gathering. We welcome people from all Passive House communities. We welcome people interested in electrification, in embodied carbon, in climate adaptation, in indoor air quality, and oh yeah, that little job of retrofitting 6 billion buildings in our lifetimes. So please turn on your cameras. We want to see you. Please turn on your microphones for just a minute. We want to join a toast tonight to wood and craftsmanship.
Wood and craftsmanship. Cheers.
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 Cheers. Cheers.
All right. Now mute your mics, but leave your cameras on. We have a great show tonight. Naomi Beal is going to tell us about the passivhausMAINE Fall Forum, and we're going to hear more from Susan Jones, who you just met. Now, please allow me to introduce my co-host, Prudence Ferreira.
Thanks, Monty. I'm Prudence, coming to you from Philadelphia. I moved to Pennsylvania, a battleground state in the US election, and actually had to go through the extraordinary jumping through hoops 3 times of trying to register to vote as a new voter before it finally stuck. So my vote in this election would actually make a difference. Pennsylvania is the birthplace of the US Constitution, and also it's the birthplace of low-income housing tax credits for Passive House. Hey, thanks to the efforts of Tim McDonald. Anyway, this election, not to be too US centric, but it's a real turning point in terms of the future of our industry, at least in the US, and to what extent there will be support at all levels, or we will be continuing to fight an uphill battle. Every week on this happy hour, I take heart and inspiration from stories and camaraderie from all of you on this call, hearing from folks in Canada, New Zealand, Australia, UK, the EU. And the battle is real wherever we are, that battle between ego, competitiveness, greed, and fear, or embracing of oneness, not in spite of our differences, but through our very diversity itself. And so when Monty says we're inclusive, that's what we're talking about, is embracing that diversity. And this is a dynamic we talk about, at least indirectly, through that inclusiveness on this happy hour. We all have played a role, and rigor and different perspectives are key because none of us alone have the answers. We just don't. And I just want to say that each of us can be really proud of who we are and where we're coming from, what perspectives we're coming from, our experiences. And the degree to which we're transparent and open with each other, we learn faster. So while we focus on solutions and strategies we all can share, we don't need to downplay our diversity. There's strength in it. So tonight, I'm really excited because I think it's so imperative that because we in the Passive House, beautiful nerd community that we have, don't have all the answers, we really need to venture outside of our little sandbox and learn from others. And this happy hour is one medium for that. Our program tonight is bringing that to us. We get both and. We get some fresh, broader perspective from a talented designer, Susan, who is not a Passive House geek. And we get the kickoff for passivhausMAINE's Fall Forum. And with that, I am going to toss it to Monty if you have more introduction of Naomi.
Yeah, I do. I'm going to go just a bit out of my way in introducing Naomi. When I was 23 years old, I had squandered a little bit of my youth in Central America, and I was broken. I was physically broken. I was emotionally destroyed. I was morally in doubt. I was as lost as a young person can be. And so I made the decision to go to Maine and study wooden boat building. And I moved to a little town that had a boat building school called Kennebunkport, the way they said it. And a bunch of angry old drinkers with fishing problems taught me to build boats with my hands. And somewhere in that barn full of wood chips, they showed me the core main values of wood and craftsmanship. And they healed me. Something about drunk old men telling you how to build a boat actually can heal you. And so my invitation to all of us is, if you're feeling a little broken, If you're feeling you could use a little bit of what Maine has to teach, think about the passivhausMAINE Fall Forum. It's in the next few days. You can tune in from the comfort of your own home. You don't have to go get beaten up in Latin America to go to Maine. You can do it tomorrow. And to tell you what's on their agenda and what can help heal you as Maine healed me is Naomi Beal.
Thank you, Monty. I wasn't exactly sure where you're going with that introduction, but I can say you're not alone in having found that kind of refuge in Maine and even in the boat building programs. I think it's a classic story, but I'm glad it worked for you. I am going to share my screen and give you just a really quick, can you see this? Can you see my slides? Okay, I'm just going to give you a super quick overview of the whole forum in like 2 minutes. So it's the 8th one, and it's virtual, which is new for us, and we're working on it. I can't do anything without thanking our sponsors. Thank you 475 and Huber Engineered Woods for their gold level sponsorship, Thornton Tomasetti and Pinnacle, our long faithful sponsors. Minaterre, BR+A have been fabulous, and we have a community sponsor with our Maine Indoor Air Quality Council. We love them. Susan tonight, thank you. Tomorrow we do have a welcome session, which includes me and Cassie from the Maine Climate Council, who'll give us an update on how Maine is really reaching our carbon goals, which are the Paris Accord goals with some modifications. We've had a year process figuring that out. We have the Zero Carbon track, which features friends from Thornton Tomasetti from London and the East Coast. We have our friends from Vermont talking about carbon in our foundations, not wood, but other things. Model C from Place Taylor will make a visit there. And then we have Matt O'Malley talking about his all wood, it should say almost passive house building. That is not quite passive house building, the one in Connecticut, but it's beautiful and zero carbon, including embodied or close to zero carbon, including the embodied carbon of the materials. Jesse Thompson and Kai Fast from Kaplan Thompson will talk about their affordable housing. Our friends from Thornton Tomasetti and BR+A will be talking about how they created a path to zero carbon buildings in Boston for new construction. It's a great policy guide. Our retrofit track, which is our 50 houses favorite, starts with Alan Gibson from Geologic and our initial 50 houses project, 74 Birch. Abby Sherry from Ontario will be talking about his historic renovation. Jeff Klug will be talking about another historic renovation, Foamless in Boston. Our friends from New York, Matt and Bhakti, will be talking about monitoring and how relevant that is for pre and post renovation work. Betsy Egar from Pembina and Brett Webster from Rocky Mountain will be joining me to talk about jumpstarting renovations on scale. What are all those programs and how will they work, and how will we renovate 9 billion buildings in the next 3 years? Our student track starts with Anya, who is a local superstar, our youth rep on the Maine Climate Council and has attended COP at least 3 times, I think. She's an amazing speaker and you'd be lucky to see her. Jasper is going to give an intro to PH4 students specific, and you all know him, I hope. Many of you do. He's a really wonderful guy with his own business, Maine Passive House, not to be confused with Passive House Maine. Phil Cheney from SMRT, one of our biggest architectural firms in Portland, will be talking about University of Southern Maine's biggest and newest passive house project. Is a student dormitory done with a couple of other partners, including Stephen Winters, but that should be an exciting project. And then we have our students, which I'm so excited about. Isaac and others. I'm just spacing out on these young students' names, but they are presenting their research, and they've all recorded their programs. They're youthful and enthusiastic and getting Passive House in our University of Maine Augusta architecture program, and I'm so thrilled about that. So that's our conference in oh, my slides are stuck. That's our conference in a nutshell. I hope to see you there. Follow us on our hashtags and etc.
And just quickly, what hours is it the next couple days, and where do you register, and how much?
Oh yeah, so the registration is right there. The hours are 1 to 4 on Thursday and Friday. We're trying to keep it short and sweet. Tickets are very cheap.
Cool.
$70 and $90, I think. 70 for members.
The cost,
Thank you.
the cost of a FedEx delivery of lunch.
Exactly. It's like nothing.
I'm going to do some really fast announcements for folks. So, and I'm hopefully you can see that. Let's see, actually, I'm probably doing this wrong. I'm doing this wrong again. Darn it. Sorry. The problem is I share as a video and then it gets messed up. Okay. There. Can you see the Passive House Weekend preview?
Looks good.
Okay, good. All right. Great podcast episode from Harley Weston of Solar Properties in Australia. Has a really crazy background in mining and helicopter piloting and stuff. So really super interesting. And I want to point out that we've got the Spain conference going on now, and next week, the FIAS Hootenannies. And I just wanted to click into this and show that next Monday, the Builders Hootenanny is happening, educators, architects, developers, and then the design competition. So there's lots of great stuff going on next week via those Hootenannies. We've got the socials, of course, including Mark Wiley's BS Fridays with Dave Cooper, lots of great educational content as well. And we also published our Passive House on the Front Lines video here. You can go to our Passive House Accelerator YouTube channel to see that. And it's all about Passive House homeowners and their stories about the adjustments they're making to deal with the crazy pollution around wildfires. So super interesting. And I'm going to hand it off now because we need to get to the good stuff.
All right, indeed. So we are super excited to welcome architect and cross-laminated timber champion Susan Jones to be our featured guest tonight. Susan is a cool chick. She was a Fulbright scholar. She got a Fulbright scholarship in Berlin, Germany, and she actually did her undergrad in philosophy before she went on to do a master's in architecture. So she is a thinking designer. We're going to hear from her tonight on connections between carbon sequestering, power of wood-based construction materials, and Maine's forest economy, forest certifications, and the tie between delivering these zero carbon buildings that we're moving towards, and some practical ways that we can look towards educating ourselves more to be able to do that in the Passive House world. So with that, Susan, we're just super happy to have you, and I'll let you take it away.
Awesome, Prudence. Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here and really honored, and it's exciting to see all these faces, some of which are really familiar to me, and old friends, and hopefully a lot of new friends. I really enjoy the Passive House community a ton, and I've been to a bunch of conferences locally and in New York, but I gotta say I'm not a Passive House certified person, and I'm not trying to represent myself as that. And I wanna just know, I love your big tent that you're casting, and I really appreciate being part of a small part of that big tent. So thank you to Maine, to Naomi, to Prudence, to Zach, to Monty, all of you who helped organize this. It's really exciting. And I also, just as a side note, I love what you're doing for the Passive Accelerator. This idea that I guess came out of Vancouver to do this global area is just fantastic. And I just think it's one of the sidelines, a silver lining of the benefit of these COVID times. So But with that, I think I'm going to start sharing my screen, and I want to make sure that everybody can see that. Hold on, I'm going to get to my full screen here and see if it comes in loud and clear to everybody. Can you give me a thumbs up? It's good? Okay, you can see it. Nice. Very good. Yeah, so let me just make sure I can go forward on this. Yeah. Okay. This is a quick story about the emergence of mass timber in the US as a lower carbon construction, but it's also a quick story of a personal journey to help bring that to fruition. And it's also a bit of a primer about what mass timber is very quickly. But what I really did is also put a whole bunch of geeky slides in, because this community I know is really geeky, and I really respect that, and I'm one of you. But I got to warn you in advance, Monty Paulson, I can't answer all your LCA questions over this for your envelope analysis. So forgive me if I'm not able to get to every single last detail and drill it down, but I hopefully can be a messenger who can connect you with people that are out there. So before I launch, is everything good? The video and the sound is all okay? I don't have to worry about that. Okay, cool. Thank you. The story begins in the forest, and I don't think we need much reminder of that after that video. I really have to thank Forest Proud for that. But this is kind of the two poles, this old growth forest that is part of a national park in Washington State, not far from my home, and also the sort of the mechanized analysis of a tree as logs. And these are two poles that are represented in our culture, in our society, in our mythos, that are really quite different. And they also don't necessarily represent the reality of our forests. And I had the opportunity some 10 years ago to go back and look at our family forest, which is up on the Mount Constitution, the highest point in the San Juan Islands outside of Seattle, and look at a forest that my grandfather had planted some 60 years ago, right before I was born. And he had planted it, and I expected these beautiful rows of, you know, amazing 14, 16-inch Douglas fir trees. And what I really found was a whole series of very small, overstocked, spindly hemlocks with the occasional Douglas fir tree that was kept in the background. And that made me think and rethink some of the ideas of my really very superficial ideas about what a forest was. And it in part started me on this journey to discern what it was about how I could use this opportunity to build my own house for the next decade. And it in turn became really the life focus of our practice as we move forward. So when I built this CLT house, it came online in 2015. It was a result of about 4 or 5 years of a journey of understanding both the forest that it had emerged into my personal life, also the personal opportunity to be able to build a house, and that all of what that means as an architect. You know, it's kind of a dream, as I mentioned in the video, but it's also a huge responsibility for anybody who's thinking straight, is how to do this in a most thoughtful way. And it became this study, if you will, of one's own house. This is the origins of the word ecology from the 19th century definitions of this, using the Greek oikos, house, to be the study of one's house. And of course, the house in this case is much broader than a personal house, but it really means the broader study of our house as the earth, as we all know and care deeply about on this conversation. But it's a sweet, sort of became something that really was a touchstone for me as I went forward in this journey over the next 10 years. So here's a little bit of the geeky part, you guys. This is a CLT house as it's unstripped. This is after all of these CLT panels are put on, you can see this is one panel. It's been prefabricated, it's been cut, it's been splined together with just a 2x6, which is attached through a lot of screws. This is a simple platform framing with the 5-ply CLT here, 3-ply CLT on top, sitting on a series of panels on the ground floor, which have also been splined together with these 2x6 splines. And so these 67 panels arrived on our building site, which is right outside my window now, and in the December of 2014. And we were putting this up in the middle of rainstorms and windstorms and just a ridiculous climate situation that made no sense, but we had to get our kids moved in before they started high school, which I sort of achieve, but not really quite, by the next summer of 2015. So a little bit of the envelope. These were then eventually attached by these Simpson screw straps. There was 857 connections that were made. There's some straps that go down into the foundation. You can see the Prisoko coming on and some flashing that's going on here, some taping that was happening at the joint areas. But one thing you don't see is that I really screwed up on is to not put the tape on between the panels on the outside of this. And I'd like to say that that was what prevented the house from getting its passive house certification, or at least one of the major things. Regardless, at least passing the red door test, I'm ashamed to admit that I didn't spend the $2,000 to do that tape and the labor for the result that would have been a lot better. So a few words for the wise on that one. But I really have to say I was thrilled to, despite those delinquencies, really thrilled to be featured on Tree Hugger as the perfect wall. And that was pretty exciting to me. You can kind of see, you can't really see the CLT in here because it's covered up with Vapro Shield in here. That's part of the orange in here, covering up the CLT panel. Then there's the 6.5 inches of Roxol that's put on the outside of that, which enabled us to achieve an R37 for the wall. And then the carriage for the Douglas fir Shaoshugi treated came to the site pre-treated from Montana. It was a 1x4 product that allowed the airspace to circulate in that as a rain screen. And then there's flashing at the bottom, which allowed the water to escape in there. So that was exciting. And thank you, Lloyd, for the perfect wall. A little bit on carbon here, and I should have put a note on here, but these are assemblies that we studied in my 2013 University of Washington studio, where we looked at 3 different types of basic wall assemblies. And one was just to kind of get a comparison: concrete with rigid insulation, and then a 2x4 wall with bat insulation, and then a CLT with exterior insulation, much as we built it in that time. This was off of Athena, and this was super early. However, I will say these students were working with Kate Simonen, who, as you all probably know, is a super Lca analyst and could be a great person to present on this program, actually. But you can see as the baseline, we, for the GWP, we had a 0, and then moving upwards from that baseward point, adding the 2x4s with the studs was more GWP emitted. And then finally, the concrete was a significant, about a 3-to-1 ratio over the CLT ratio in there. Again, these are student numbers, and but I just thought I would share them. This has been a long study and a long passion about trying to get these carbon things right that started really early on, before I really knew not much about LCA work back in 2012 and 13. But this story about building the house really became exciting after, Lloyd is on this call, and Lloyd really came through my house and put it out into the world of consciousness, world of all of you amazing passive house folks. And it got very large very quickly, and I needed some allies, I realized. So I continued to reach out because this subject was growing beyond my expertise and beyond, in some ways, my capacity to control it. Part of that was a key allyship that I developed with the University of Washington, and these are students of mine up there. We're looking right now here at a mass timber high-rise construction which has a CLT 3-ply floor, potential gypsum wallboard, lightweight gypsum, acoustical barrier, and then a topping slab of hardwood, et cetera, on top of that. This is just an example of some of the studies that we've begun and the research that we've done that was helping me kind of get a grounding in what this technology and was really involving, what its carbon footprints were, what its constructability was, what its acoustics were, really all of the things necessary to change fundamentally the construction industry in the US. We started to do that. This book was published in 2018. We were putting it together in 2017, but it became clear that we had a lot of information to share, even if it wasn't perfect. And I could probably spend a lifetime writing this book, but I ended up only spending a year or 2 just to get it out into the public realm. It was a shared element that we did on a pro bono basis and put it out there in the world, and just to kind of get the conversation moving as fast and as quickly as possible. And it did its work in many ways. But the question of allies really became more important when the American Institute of Architects called me in 2016 and asked me to sit on the code committees of the International Code Council to help change the codes to allow tall mass timber buildings, tall wood buildings. And as many of you know, the codes are allowed anything under 6 stories with mass timber all day long, and we could build in most parts of the country with that existing code. But this anything taller than that, which was really the real sweet spot where we can begin to offset and replace carbon, became a real question of scaling up. And I was reluctant to take on the position. The AIA was pretty clear about it, though. My reluctance was based in the fact that I didn't think of myself as a real code expert, and I still, to this date, don't think of myself as that way. But my expertise in mass timber, sitting on that committee with real code experts, was invaluable, and it turned out to be a very fruitful relationship in the real sense of true allies, kind of working for the same goal. That committee was a phenomenally difficult experience and a really exciting one, and really resulted in some real change that was very exciting. There were folks from the AWC here. There were folks from the gypsum wallboard group. There was folks from concrete and steel, and on the other side of this was 6 fire guys that were, including the head of the committee, that came out of the fire committee's world, and it was an intense experience, often in these really bad conference rooms right outside of O'Hare Airport that we would fly to every day, and just go to this really bad hotel and sit there for 3 days in the darkness and get in kind of argumentative fights with our colleagues. And it was one of the most difficult things I'd ever done in my life. But what we were doing was really creating a new building type. The issue of scale was really critical. Our house was awesome. I didn't show you the church and the schools that we built that I loved. But really, in order to make a real impact on our carbon footprint, we had to scale up. And this was a critical decision that changed and is changing my practice, and it really began to change the construction industry as we know it. There are literally hundreds of examples of buildings that are being built today because of these codes and because of some of the work that we were doing to research this. This is an example of the Type 4C building, which is mostly exposed, as you can see here, except for the floor, the gypsum topping that we talked about in our studio in that image, and then mostly of the core is protected. But in Type 4C, up to 8 stories, you can leave the majority of the CLT mass timber exposed. And this was the results of the 3 years worth of work from 2016 to 2019. We developed the codes for an 18-story building, Type 4A, a 12-story building, Type 4B, and Type 4C at 8 or 9 stories, depending on which occupancy. These all had different requirements in terms of their openness, in terms of their ability to have their wood, their mass timber revealed and exposed. You can almost reveal almost everything in the Type 4C and almost nothing, in fact, nothing at all on the 18 stories. And this was a series of compromises that we worked through with fire tests that were done in the field during the time of the development of the codes. And it was, again, a very intense effort that involved close collaboration and sometimes serious, well, I guess I got to be honest, fighting with the code committee, with the fire committee. This was in some ways also a real issue of turf war, and you can probably see that in my face, that stress, talking here in front of the ICC Code Committee action hearings. In April of 2018, the concrete industry came out in waves, steel industry not far behind, and the fire group was doing an incredible amount of work behind the scenes on this. So this was a real step forward for the International Code Committee, and I was thrilled to be part of it when they were finally ratified in January of 2019 for the 2018 IBC, and later in Washington State as of January in 2019. And now I have the incredible pleasure of working on a very large Type 4C 8-story building, residential building in downtown Seattle, Capitol Hill. And I feel like the pendulum is finally swinging back towards the build, which is really in my heart, and what I really want to do and make impact in this particular arena as an architect, practicing architect. and not as a policymaker and not as a code official. But this has been a really exciting project. This is a project that we're just about halfway through our building permit corrections, and we hope to get a building permit within 3 to 4 months towards the first quarter of the year. It's 126 units on Capitol Hill, 66,000 square foot type 4C residential building for a really wonderful nonprofit called Community Roots Housing. Housing is based on middle income housing income levels, and we're really excited about being able to work with that project. I do want to go into a little bit of the carbon situation, and like I say, Monty, I don't have all the answers for you, but I'm humble enough to know that, and I'm happy to point you in those areas that people can help with. As we all know, this project, this mass timber is really only as good as the wood that it comes from. And you can see this dotted line is the concrete design option. This was a study done by Arup some years ago. And this is the timber design option, where as it pretty much checks out really beautifully until end of life. There's some question marks about what happens beyond building end of life because it can't be really regulated, quantified right now. But if you don't do that, that's this gray area. And so you can begin to see this gray line as very, very close in their nature. So really how you source that wood sustainably is the key thing. Another element to keep really in mind is this is some work that we've been doing with the Nature Conservancy as a very large study, and working with Mark Wishney, who was the former Director of Forestry for the Nature Conservancy. And this is a slide that we presented jointly together a couple of weeks ago. The American
Susan, can I interrupt you just real quickly? We have some background noise, so I'm going to mute everybody, and you'll have to unmute yourself to continue. Okay.
Much appreciated, Zach.
Yeah, here we go.
Yeah,
here
awesome.
goes mute all.
So this is a really important slide.
Oh, so you need to unmute yourself now, Susan, so we can hear you.
There we go.
Great, thanks.
Can you hear me now? Okay, great. Thank you, Zach. I almost kept talking. Cool. So this is a really important slide for people to understand, and it's a pretty complex one. We can talk about it in Q of A, but it has to do with an analysis that Mark Wishney has been leading through the Nature Conservancy, and essentially forests represent 73% of the entire natural climate solutions, which is approximately 30 to 40% of our fight against climate change. And we can discuss that later, but I really want this is an important point on how we think about the substitution factor between wood and concrete, and also how we think about how we are going to grow and nurture our forests to continue to nurture and sustain and bank more carbon, but also use the wood from the forest and pull it out of the forest to bank the carbon in our buildings and in our cities. And it's a pretty compelling argument that Mark can tell more collaboratively, more efficiently than I can, but it's the key one. So along those lines, I really want this sense of allies has been a really, really important thing, because there is, of course, always the laws of unintended consequences. And as well-meaning as we all may be, that wood is the good substitute for concrete. Just like we didn't really know what we would get when we built concrete buildings, and we realized it's one of the most grotesque polluting materials in our construction industry. You know, there may be other elements that have laws of impact from the forest and from the use of wood. So we were really lucky to be able to partner with the Nature Conservancy, the Forest Products Laboratory, the University of Washington School of Environmental Forest Sciences, Quorum, and PG Practical, to be involved in this major global-based 2-year study. And we've just released phase one of it. I think actually it's in white paper peer review, but for any of you who are interested further, we did have a presentation at the American Conference of Lca Scientists just about a month ago. And those presentations are online, and I have a few of them, but there's some really interesting information coming out. So those of you who feel really passionate about the origins of the wood and the impact and the demand on the forests, that phase is coming up. It'll be the phase 2 of this study. But for now, the Lca Analysis are coming back, and it was a very ambitious It was a very ambitious study. We had the 3 types of buildings, 8 stories, 12 stories, 18 stories. We did 3 different geographic regions, the Northeast, the Southeast, and the Pacific Northwest. And those all have, of course, different seismic conditions. And we had different foundations. We were using the piles, the mat, and the grade beams, et cetera, for the different sizes of buildings. We really got into the superstructure of each one of these. And we performed 18, we didn't, but our team as a whole performed 18 different Lca analyses. And those will be coming out in the public realm in the next, I hope, a couple of months from now, as soon as the peer review gets done on these papers. It was a very significant piece of work done by some really brilliant Lca scientists that kind of helped keep me honest about all this. I'll just give a couple of these results, and don't question me too hard on this because these are not my slides. These are from actually Maureen Putnam's presentation at the Lca conference the other day, but you can begin to see the kind of the nuance that we were getting into. These were whole building LCAs, and we were going down into the materiality of everything from acoustic panels to rebar to insulation, gypsum concrete, vapor barriers, etc. You know, the big takeaway, here's the timber buildings in all cases. These are the 8 stories, 12 stories, and 18 stories. These are the concretes in those same areas. And it's typically about a 40% difference in terms of we're contributing less GWP by about 40%. And in all cases, the gypsum, the concrete is a huge amount, and it's even a large amount when you consider the foundations in a mass timber building. As I always say, these are hybrid buildings. Surprisingly, I think to some of the Lca scientists, but not really to me, since I had to write those codes, gypsum wallboard contributes quite a lot of the GWP for all of these buildings. And particularly more in the 18 stories. And interestingly, in the Pacific Northwest, which this is looking at, it contributes a lot because we did not use mass timber as a demising wall because of the seismic conditions. That is critical there. So it proportionally contributed a little bit more. But these are just a bit of a snapshot of some of the takeaways from these. This is again Maureen Putnam's slide. Thank you, Maureen. And this is talking about the impact of that gypsum wallboard as you go up. It just happens to be in the Northeast region for mass timber buildings. Gypsum wallboard is the blue, and you can see it's almost minimal in the 8 stories, and it's quite a big contribution to the 18 stories. So after we start replacing concrete, I think replacing GWB might be the next thing to work on for this thing. But along with the critical issues of life safety, Lca, the life safety issues are really a key one. And I had a gigantic education in the fire world of fire, everything from what a European fire was to what an American fire was. And we can talk about that later if you want, but it gets back to this question of gypsum wallboard. We had to accept as a compromise, the 3 layers of gypsum wallboard on an 18-story building, or actually 13 and above, because the fire constituency was so strong. It was taking a very conservative approach to the fire test that we had done as part of the ICC process. And we all knew that, and it was a source of deep regret for me that I was not able to convince the rest of the 18-person committee to be a little more aggressive on that, nor to do tests that were more indicative of what we really felt as what this material could handle. So I was given a second chance, which I was really thrilled. In 2019, we got a big wood innovation grant from the USDA. And we're now literally right in the middle of doing 6 more fire tests. And we just finished test number 4 this morning at 5 a.m. our time. It's being done in Sweden. We're cooperating with the Research Institute of Sweden to do these studies. And I have to say, the first 2 tests were unbelievable. We convinced the industry to go from what was essentially covering up probably 60–70% of it. Then I got them to go down to covering up about 30% only. And then at the 3rd test, we wanted to find some limits, and we were down to about 20%, but they were only in the rear wall. And we just had another one that was completely open except for the rear wall, again, where you would normally have an entry. And that was just passed in flying colors this morning, which I was really glad to hear. So these kind of relationships of allies, I know Passive House is really great at making those allies and working with them, but these scientists that helped me corroborate, so much of what we were trying to do from a code perspective were absolutely essential. And it's been amazingly gratifying to bring these partnerships to this interesting study. So yeah, just in closing, I thought I would just end on some happy things on some architectural pieces, a little bit more about our mass timber project going up in the central district here, the 8 stories of timber, mass plywood panel stairs, cross-laminated timber diaphragms, floor ceiling diaphragms, which are exposed as ceilings, post and beam, glulam columns and beams. And then of course we do still have the concrete foundation, which is a pretty light foundation because all of the mass of the building above is much lighter than it would be in a concrete building, for instance. And I think it doesn't, we don't need any convincing any of us here that to realize that these small urban apartments are really made more lovely and more inviting as a place to live, as a place to inhabit in the middle of the city and sense the presence of nature and even the smell and the touch around us. And this is the building as it's going through design review right now. We're just about wrapping up our final design review work. And I just want to remind us all that though it goes back to the trees and the way we can care for our natural environment, our forests are somewhat degraded, and they're degraded by our presence that we've made in the last 100 years, both through clear cutting and logging, which is now I think largely regulated to a very safe degree. And we're producing more fiber, more wood, more trees than we log every year. And that doesn't mean that we shouldn't log these trees, but we should need to do that carefully. And I think everybody on this call is aware of that, and really care for what's left behind, because what's left behind, this is a forest that is our family forest, but it's one that's hasn't been well cared for. And we are personally, this is my husband, Marco, trying to make amends for that, to do our best. And I think everybody has a park in their backyard or, somewhere close by that they can help contribute this by either planting trees or caring for the existing trees in other parks, and really working with the tools that we all have to put these ideas into action and to save this beautiful planet. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Susan.
I hope that wasn't
No, Susan, is fantastic. I just threw up a rendering of a mass timber project that's going to happen here in Vancouver, and I love the one that you showcased. It just gives me goosebumps just even looking at the wall behind you, which is fantastic. We've got about 12 questions going at the moment, and we're going to kick it off with Bronwyn.
Hey, Susan, can you hear me?
I can, Bronwyn. It's always nice to hear your voice.
Wonderful to see you. Thanks for this awesome presentation. Code question, really in the process, which is heroic, having attempted to do some code work here myself. What was the biggest barrier that was thrown up in your fight to get CLT projects and buildings allowed in the code structure? If there was one thing you could identify.
No question, it was fire. It was fire, and it completely caught me off guard because, in the Northwest, we have a series of really great research institutes that have structure, and we were looking at structure and seismic questions. And so they did a lot of research on it. And for some reason, I had in my head, thanks to all my friends who are structural engineers, that the structure and seismic was the big issue. What was so surprising is that these were university-based research institutes, that there was almost no focus on fire. And what's completely flipped for me was watching this 6'8", very large man stand up and bring himself and almost all of us to tears the first day I was on that code committee, because he was describing his boys climbing up the stairs and trying to save lives and being in these burning buildings. And he did it much more effectively. And I really realized that this is the barrier. And it was borne out again and again and again. Even right before we were passing the codes at the very end, all of the fire chiefs in California were banding together to vote against this. And the fire chiefs and all of the fire constituency had equal votes along with the building code committee officials. And this was, because they do these online votes, and every code official in America can, if you belong to this, can vote, but also every fire official can. And so, you had tremendous capacity to mobilize. The fire people had tremendous capacity to mobilize and vote against that. And we were coming up with all kinds of contingency plans to fight against that. But really it was the fire tests in the end that, that helped tremendously, because even my friend Sean, he didn't vote for it, but he had to admit that he couldn't really vote against it either because of the superior performance of this material in those tests.
So it really just took the proven testing data to actually convince, to make the change.
And it wasn't even, it was even more than the testing data, it was the tests. It was the visceral sense of standing in front of that wire reinforced glazing and feeling the heat of that incredible fire and the fuel load that was, you know, above and beyond any pack rat person in existence in that was stuffed into those compartments, and seeing those flames burst out. I mean, the emotional quality was something that we had to fight against a lot, Bronwyn. And this is where Sean couldn't even vote for it in the end, because it was just too emotional. He didn't want to be responsible for a death of his fire person. So the only way we could combat that was with the reality of the equally emotional thing of watching this gigantic fire burn with no sprinklers for 4 hours. It goes out and there's charring, and you scrape the char away, and it's wood. And that was pretty phenomenal to see that in person and to feel it, to feel that heat and to know what was going on.
Fantastic, thanks. A quick follow-up. What was the European fires versus the American fires? Can you
It
just
took me the longest time to figure that out.
like, what is that?
I was so confused. I was just, Sean, you know, you're just full of shit. You're telling me that the fire is different. And you're, you know, but there were some differences. He finally did convince me. And this is again through just, you know, not being emotional and just being logical. The key was that, first of all, exit stairs are required, obviously, in Europe, but not 2 exit stairs. And I'm taking his word for it. I'm not an expert on European codes, but many high-rise buildings are not required to have 2 stairs. And so that creates, once you have that, like we do in our codes, you have a different ventilation requirement. Additionally, most of the tests that had been done were done in Europe, and they were done without the corridor in existence. And so they just had the compartment and they closed it all up, and they didn't have a door out to a hallway. His point was that when you open the door, there's more ventilation coming through the compartment and then going out the windows, which are presumably blown out from glass. And so there's this flow through that's coming through, and that fuels the fire. And he didn't know what the implications would be for that. So those were some of the areas that were convincing to me that, okay, so maybe he didn't mean European fire, but he meant the testing.
Interesting. Awesome. Thank you, Susan.
Great start to the questions, Bronwyn. Thank you. Damien, you're coming from Thursday. Damien, how's Thursday looking for you?
Yes, it's always great to be in the future, but it doesn't mean that Australia can't be in the past as well. So I think most of my questions were answered by Ian. It was actually about acoustic performance of mass timber. And I'm just conscious that as we go forward in Passive House, in promoting our ideas, we have to make sure that we stop the naysayers on the issues that they say nay about, fire being a classic example. But we also have to branch out, because, you know, air quality is a big selling point. So similarly, if there are other places where we can make headway, like acoustic performance, then those are also things that we have to sell. Yes, we meet your standards for flammability, and we exceed your standards when it comes to sound suppression. But anyway, it's not the case. And so I'm comfortable with that. My question's been answered.
Awesome, Damien. Just to let you know, I mean, we do, have to comply with all the codes at any other building and meet the STC ratings for impact and ambient. And it's not necessarily a simple thing. You do have to rethink those assemblies, those floor assemblies. And I will have to shout out my friends at Woodworks, because they've done really a fantastic job in putting together a very robust set of assemblies that specifically meet all of the acoustics testing that's out there. And they've, for different floor assemblies, even wall assemblies, different manufacturers, et cetera. And it's a really great resource. You can just Google Woodworks acoustics assemblies online and you'll pull it up. And it's a very helpful document.
Thanks.
Excellent. Third in the queue. Uh-oh, got carried away with the chatter again. And if you missed it, Derek's note about European fires is their metric. Thank you for that joke. Michael K has 2 questions.
Susan, great presentation, outstanding presentation. As someone who came from the light gauge metal framing background, I did everything I could possibly destroy wood. And until I became enlightened about embodied carbon. So thank you very much. Just really 2 questions. The first question is a rather simple one. The wall deflection criteria for the 18-story building. What was the deflection criteria?
I'm sorry, I'm not a structural engineer, Michael. I have no idea what it was. I can put you in good contact with people who can tell you a very accurate answer of that, but I'm sorry, I don't have that. And I'm an architect, and that's what I don't have that number for you.
Okay, and no problem. And the second part is in terms with the 18-story structure again, which is outstanding. Any type of seismic special connections for seismic loading required at all?
Oh yeah, there's a lot. And a lot of the seismic stuff, as I was mentioning, hasn't been totally figured out. You might know this 12-story building called Framework, which unfortunately did not get built, but it did get a building permit. It's in the state of Oregon. And they developed what's called a rocking wall system to handle the seismicity for the entire 12-story building. Oregon, as you know, is in a seismic region. So that was really critical. But it's quite a custom system, and it's not the most inexpensive one. And so one of the things that some of the more commercial buildings are using right now are just steel BRBs that brace buckling restraint braces. And that's been a common solution. But to get maybe back to a little bit to your wall deflection, given your metal stud background, one of the difficult things in the Pacific Northwest, where we have seismic events, that the demising walls are very stiff. And so in an event, they actually can potentially wreak havoc on the existing superstructure around them that may or may not be mass timber. So typically what's used is a little deflection track that contains the not the mass timber wall, but just even the studs in there, or potentially a mass timber panel that allows that to move independent of the superstructure above and around it. And that's often a metal stud that allows that movement to happen with a special connection. And but that's one of the reasons we did not use to make the demising walls mass timber in our LCA studies in the Pacific Northwest, because partially we wanted a difference, but also because it just it's a more expensive technology and has implications for budget in this area. So we didn't feel it would be used as widely in the Pacific Northwest.
That demising wall, the deflection that you're talking about, a lot of times that's done with a deep channel with slots cut in, and they just put a bolt in it to allow it to deflect up and down without transferring the actual load to the demising wall.
That's exactly the detail that's identified and used. And I would, anybody who really is keen on that, that's exactly what I would use. We chose not to in our LCA study, and we also chose not to in our mass timber housing project that we're working on currently right now.
Outstanding presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Michael.
Thanks, Michael. And Susan, you can take a sip of whatever beverage you have, because it is the top of the hour. Where did this time go? And Zach's going to give us some announcements.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Fantastic presentation. We're looking forward to hearing more answers to questions. If you are wondering how we do these programs, it's thanks to support from our sponsors. Otherwise, we wouldn't be doing this work. And so I want to say thank you to our founding sponsors, Baxtingui Architects, Mitsubishi Electric Train HVAC US, RDH Building Science, StoCorp, and Zola Windows. Also, thank you to our stakeholder partner, NYSERDA. And thank you to our patron sponsors, Morrison Hershfield, 475 High Performance Building Supply, and Partel. Next week, we're going to have a very special Maine-based presentation at the happy hour by Jesse Thompson. He's going to be talking about his commoditized approach to enclosures for affordable passive house projects in Maine. So it'll be super interesting to hear what he has to share with us there. And then finally, on October 29th, on Thursday, we're going to have our Passive House Component Spotlight. This is the third time we've done a Passive House Component Spotlight. And this one will focus on Partel and the founder and technical director of Partel, Hugh Wierisky, who will present about the Vera product, which is a smart technical system for airtight buildings. So we'll learn about the building science of that, and it'll be a very similar format to the happy hour with a short presentation followed by a bunch of questions and answers. So don't miss it. Thanks.
Monty or Prudence to wrap things up.
Go ahead, Prudence.
All right. Well, I think we still have a few questions to share. I see a lot of chatter, and I'm excited that there's already people in the community that are passionate about implementing mass timber and using some of our wood products. Susan is going to stick around with us for a little while. So if you still have remaining questions, just type them in the chat, and our question concierge, Sean, will help get everyone in the queue. For those of you that need to go eat dinner or work on a deadline, whatever you have going, thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to see you next week. And for the rest of you all, let's roll on into the after hour.
Monty, anything else, or we're just going to keep going? Keep going? All right. Susan, thanks again. I typically dive back in the questions and I forget to cheers, and then someone types in and says, Sean, you forgot to cheers. So I'm going to take a pause, and we're going to continue just cheersing you and your great presentation and all your great work. It was fantastic. Cheers. And we have, I think we got still about 8 more questions, and we'll continue on. I got a couple more that have just popped in. Before we wrap things up, I got to go back. It was, sorry, I had it and I lost it. Arena, and then Harvey. Arena, if you're still with us.
Yes, I'm here.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Susan, first for a great presentation and for the work you're doing for the benefit of all of us. My question as a residential designer is about the lifespan of a single family home and the evolution of that home. How are you thinking about layout changes, additions as the family needs change or ownership changes? How does this material or structural system work with changes?
Yeah, that's a great question, Irina. Thank you. I mean, these are panels, right? So they are, and they're just wood. They do have a structural support to them. So this is not just an aesthetic wall, it's actually the structure. So there's a couple of things that to be really cautious about when you're thinking about making changes, which is that, you know, it does affect the entire structural solution for the project. And so you don't just want to be, yeah, even though I can dig a chainsaw into this guy, I don't necessarily want to do that for obvious reasons. But that being said, you know, assuming you do have a full structural analysis, which you would want to have regardless, it is a pretty flexible material. You can do that relatively easy. In addition, there also, when you begin to think of end of life questions, when I take off all the exterior insulation that I showed you in one envelope slide, what's there are those 857 connections, and they're screw connections. They're not even nail connections. So the idea of taking a screw gun and reverse acting on the screws and pulling them out again, and then potentially just deconstructing the entire house, so you can get back to those 67 panels, and the only thing is you have a couple of holes along the top edge and the bottom edge where those screw connections went in. The idea of reusing all 67 of these panels to me seems really intuitively easy. Now that's an architect speaking, so I haven't done my end of life Lca analysis to really prove that. There is a lot of discussion about deconstruction and what happens with after the buildings are built. And there's a couple of national experts who've really been looking at this for maybe 5 or 6 years, and I don't have their names off the top of my head, but I can get them to you. And it's because it's a really important question. It's probably one of the areas that hasn't been studied to everybody's satisfaction in the LCA side of things, because as you saw in that little Arab gap, the graph that I showed, that end of life piece begins to really mess with things, the LCA analysis a little bit. On the other hand, we all know you can't do much with concrete either. So the idea, and even a gypsum wallboard stud wall is not super helpful. So again, this is an architect's intuition, not a scientist, but this thing is really solid, and it can be reused in so many ways, at the very least, and just as firewood at the end. But I can't imagine that somebody wouldn't come along and just trim off the edges and then for some other structure in the future. But it's a great question and needs more study, no question about it.
Thank you.
Thanks. We'll probably come back to this in about 5 or 6 more questions about these kind of details. Next one is Hardy. You still with us?
Yeah, still am. Thanks, Sean.
Great.
Great presentation, Susan. It was really, really enlightening. Just as a quick aside, I'm just taking the tradesman course to be certified. So as a passive house, so I really empathize with you by missing the tape because that's one of the things that we're always talking about, the air barrier.
Thank you.
I'm just wondering if my question is always on cost, because that's part of the economics when we look at it from a passive house. Did you model this at all price-wise, let's say conventional framing and conventional building versus the mass timber? And I know it's your own personal house, and you don't have to say your number, you can give a range, but what were the differences in price points for you?
I really appreciate that. Yeah, well, this was a small house in kind of passive house style. It's a 1,500 square foot house for a family of 4, 2 teenagers, so pretty large people. They're not little kids. And it was on an existing lot that had it's a very tiny, tiny lot. It's only a 2,500 square foot lot. So that was probably my biggest benefit in terms of budget, was just that I was building a small house. But as you can, there is a fair amount of detail in the house that transcended that. I didn't do a total analysis of the costs with or without in complete detail, but I did talk to my contractor a lot about this because I knew that it was a question for me as well. And it was about an 8% difference. It was higher you build with mass timber than to not build without it. And it's a really hard question. And a lot of, my developer clients will say, how much is it going to cost? And they hear 8% and they just blank out. But a lot of it is, as we know, it's so many more complicated things, especially for a larger building like this 8-story building that we're building right now or designing right now, because that's maybe 8% hard costs, and that does subtract out the gypsum wallboard you're not using and the mudding and the taping that you're not doing. But then you're also having to seal this to give at least I wanted to, as a whitewashed finish, to give it to kind of retain its UV resistant rays so it doesn't get darker. And so there were things that we did add to it, and people always forget you have to put on the exterior stuff, and it's not that dissimilar from a traditional house in the end. But the 8% difference took that into account. However, when you get to larger scale buildings, and this is why this question of scale was so critical, is that then the repetition of the panels being put into place by a crane out on site by a contractor who knows those panels intimately, that repetition then begins to save on labor costs, which then save on schedule, which then adds a tremendous amount of costs or savings to the bottom line. And so most of the larger buildings, if you're working with an experienced contractor who understands that and is transparent enough to give that schedule savings back to the owner and not just pocket it, that's key. And that really makes a gigantic difference in how we think about these buildings, because all of a sudden 2 months out of a 12-month construction schedule is a ton. It's almost 20%, and it's in that particular area, and it really adds a lot to the bottom line. And so whatever cost there might be for more expensive material costs, less expensive labor costs offset it. And that's a pretty complicated equation that not that many contractors really understand and really get. And I think as these buildings become more and more commonplace in the future, that will be a gigantic advantage. And that's where the carbon savings in the end really come in anyway.
Well, I guess one of the things we were talking about today in the course was, a passive house is probably between 4 to 8% higher anyway. So it's not out of the realm, and especially when codes are changing with respect to passive house. So I don't think it's that far removed. And you're right. If you get more volume in your house, you're on a tiny house, it'll have impact. Eventually, you're right. I think the economies of scale and having people who are used to building these, so it's repetition for them, even on a small house, it's still going to go a lot faster. So right now it's new. Later on, soon it won't be new and it'll be old hat. But anyway, thank you so much for your answer, and your house looks great. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Harvey. Appreciate it.
Sorry, Susan, I got carried away with the banter again. I had it all lined up for questions and then got carried away. Sorry, two things. One is you might want to save the chat. There's been an amazing amount of links shared throughout. Susan, we'll get back to it, but Mike from Seattle has done a great job of posting some notes. I just want a little plug for 475. If you are looking or considering mass timber, we have some ebooks. You can download them that show all the different connection details and even the DWG files that you can add into your drawings. Pretty easy and simple. So little plug there. And sorry, I know Derek was next, Ian was next, but I have to go back up to Bev. That's who I wanted. Bev from Boston. Oh, is Bev still here? Yes. Bev Craig. Okay, I'll come back to Bev. We did Harvey, thank you. Chris got answered. Ian, you had a bunch of questions. Ian from Vancouver, who's a bit of a specialty with his mass timber projects here.
Hi, Sean. Hi, everyone. I wondered, with the use of the MPP on the staircases, why, if you had it come into site anyway, did you use it only for the stairs and not anything else? Because I understand it's quite a bit cheaper than CLT, at least the stuff that I found. And also, what was the columns? I didn't note that on your drawing.
What were the columns?
Yeah.
Yeah. Good question about the MPP, and good catch. You're reading fast. So the MPP plywood panel stairs were a cost-saving measure that were introduced by our contractor for that project. And we did talk about it for the rest of the structure, for the rest of the panels. My concern about exposing the ceilings using the MPP was that we would have had to likely put on a secondary level of veneer on that in the factory, granted, but in order to get something that didn't just look like raw plywood, and I'm not talking about the beautiful Baltic birch plywood that architects fall in love with routinely, talking about kind of raw plywood. And so
I used it in my project as well, and I had to have them search through the yard to find the really pretty panels. So that was a caveat. So definitely, if you've got it exposed, then
that was really the answer that I came to. However, in stairs, it just felt like a no-brainer. It was really it's a great idea. They're going to be fairly utilitarian stairs that are going up and down, and
for walls, I guess too. Similarly, if you don't have them exposed, for walls, if you don't have them exposed, similarly, it wouldn't matter, I guess.
Yeah, and we didn't use some of the walls because we were not using wooden walls, mass plywood panel walls, or mass timber walls because of the seismic issue, and we didn't want to take into account that lovely little slip joint that I think it was Michael talked about.
I think that was everything. Cool.
Okay. Great question. Thank you, Ian.
I'm sorry, I just had to find the question because I know Scott Kennedy had it. Jenny Bellini. Is Jenny still here? Just look. No, Jenny looks like she left. But Scott Kennedy, why don't you come on and ask your question, because I know it's come up a few times, but
I'm not sure which one, but the one that I think is interesting to me is when all these fire tests are done, you don't ever see the sprinkler system working in them. And we know how reliable sprinklers are. They're a very, very reliable method of controlling fire. And our codes seem to completely ignore them. And I was curious as to whether you actually did tests with sprinklers to see what the difference would be.
Yeah, that's a great question, Scott. So you're in Vancouver, is that right?
Yeah.
The American code switched over about 6 or 8 years ago to really embrace the concept of sprinklers, and because of that performance that you mentioned. And so before I even got involved with the code committee, they had already really given some key releases for the consistent use of sprinklers. All of the codes that I mentioned earlier are assuming that we will have a robust working sprinkler system that's tested and inspected. The key thing that we kept hearing about, though, from the fire community again and again and again was, what happens when the sprinklers break down? And what happens after 20 years when this is an old building? And, they had so many what ifs out there you couldn't imagine. And there's some truth to that. So we can't really ignore that. And so that was really the purpose of the decision then to make, to do these tests based on no sprinklers. There are no sprinklers in those test compartments, but there also are, the idea is that the sprinklers had failed in those cases of the test compartments. And that's what the assumptions we were basing it on in order to convince the fire people that this was going to work. And so all of the tests were going on for the 4 hours, no sprinklers at all. And we had to avoid secondary flashovers and certain temperature requirements for not only the surfaces, but more importantly, like behind this charred surfaces, deep, like an inch and a half behind that. They couldn't get above 300 Celsius or some huge amount. But then we also did one as part of the ICC tests in 2017 at NIST outside of Washington, DC. We did do one test. What happens when it's been burning for 3 hours and no fire brigade is on board, no sprinklers, all the sprinklers worked. And then all of a sudden the fire brigade comes in and they arrive on site and they get their hoses out. And how long does it take to put the fire out? What happens then? Is it just so ingrained into the wood that it'll never come out? Well, the fire went out in 2 minutes, I believe is the number. So that was the last piece of having to convince the fire brigade that the folks that it was really a doable material, that it could be handled in multiple different disastrous fire conditions and in easy fire conditions and things in between as well.
Thanks. That was my one question. Do I get to ask my other one, Sean, while I'm here?
You know what? Chris Corson's going to ask it, so I will let you pause. And I have to apologize to Chris because I decided to give him my answer to this question, and he actually really wants it from you, Susan. So Chris, come back on, please.
Super nice, Sean. Sean, you might be on mute though. Or Chris, I guess.
Chris, are you there? If not, I will.
Maybe he liked your answer after all, Sean.
Yeah. No, shoot, he popped off. But also, Rachel had the same question, and it just comes back to it is, platform frame construction has less wood than house. So just the conversation of for below 6 stories, what do you have to say between the platform frame versus CLT, and that was part of his question. And I know Rachel, are you still there? Because you might as well ask yours as well.
Hi, yes, I'm still here. I don't know if my video's on.
There you go.
Yeah, my question was about like single family homes in terms of light frame versus the CLT. And I mean, the schedule and mass like repetition and stuff isn't as big of a concern at that scale. And so I was just wondering, in terms of like carbon and sustainability, light frame versus CLT, like how do you justify using that as your option instead?
Well, that's a great question, Rachel. And I wanted to be really honest about that, Rachel. I haven't necessarily, I'm not saying it's the best, new thing since sliced bread for single family. I think you saw my carbon question, my carbon slide, that very first one, where I compared the 3 different assemblies. And what we found out, if you're building a concrete and stucco house, like they might do a lot of in Europe, CLT is a much better answer for a single family house. But in America, we don't build our houses typically like that. The great majority of builder houses are, just like you said, light wood frame, bad insulation, and some let's say wood cladding on the exterior. when we compared it to that, and this is granted only my students, but the savings weren't really that great. And they really, and I think we're really clear about that. You know, yes, we're embodying more carbon in the walls because there's a lot of wood in here that we're keeping in it. So it's sequestering more carbon for longer. So if your goal is to take those trees out of the forest, replant the trees, and then sequester the carbon in a carbon bank, if you will, that's what I like to call my house sometimes, is a carbon bank, then that is a great goal because it really does keep this carbon in these walls until, you know, end of life issues come up that we talked about before. But in terms of, you know, offsetting the GWP, it's not as much of a gain. And so I've been really clear about that and really open about that in public and just tried to talk through the issues. I did it because it got me, you know, to understand the material. It had never been really, there was very few of the structures even in the States. And it was an exciting experimental house that I learned a lot on and helped others propel this whole industry forward, moving ahead. So it's a complicated answer, Rachel, but it's a good question. Thank you.
Actually, can I take a whack at that one too, if you don't mind, Rachel? I think we're in this phase right now where people are trying stuff. Susan's a great example of that. I think where we're headed, I hope soon, is a more mature attitude towards materiality in buildings, where you're going to see buildings that are partly light frame construction, but that use CLT maybe at elevator shafts and demising walls, and between the commercial space and the residential space upstairs. Or you're going to see taller buildings that are using a mix of CLT and metal and prefabrication, you know, and you're going to see thinner mass timber assemblies, you know, for more finishes and maybe for part of a wall panel for exterior walls. But I think our next leap is to go beyond the idea that it's all wood or all metal or all light timber, but we choose the component that makes sense in the location at the time, you know, for both the aesthetic and structural needs. Actually, somewhere in the recording is Ian's house from a few weeks ago, which uses like 4 or 5 different types of mass timber in a single family house, but really shows this idea that it's about blending the supply chain, not proving you can do it all out of CLT.
I couldn't agree more, Monty. That whole concept of hybrid structures was a huge part of my learning curve. And you're absolutely right. I mean, this house, I didn't really go into all the structure of it, but it's a hybrid construction too. I've got a couple of really beautiful white laminated steel beams downstairs that and columns that I'm very proud of, and I like it very much. And sometimes the wood on the wood becomes too much even for me. But there's a key element to what you're saying, is that where is the industry going to settle? And I am firmly of the belief that this industry is going to settle in the 8 to 12-story building range. It's going to be rampant across American towns and cities, but towns importantly, because it's not that big of a building at 8 stories. You can see all the timber, even with current codes today. And as opposed to going up to the very tall ones, which are probably always going to be made more or less covered up. Not that there won't be those buildings, and we've just seen the Ascent, you know, start construction at the 23 stories. What is it, 9/15, and it's just, but there will be this sweet spot that I think the industry is gravitating towards. And my ambition for our, you know, small contribution to that effort, our 8-story building, is that this project will become really a hallmark for future 8-story housing projects across the country, and we're delighted to be part of that, ushering in that new technology and that new building type.
Excellent points. I just want to add one that I'm looking at in Vancouver. We're deconstructing homes. We're going to have all this wood that's not going to the landfill. And one of the applications was to sandwich it in between 2x6. You'd have, you know, 3 layers of 2x4 that is 110 years old, that is not going to get burnt and not go to landfill. And now you've, you know, brought back the heritage and putting a house. So you could take down the house, deconstruct it, put into an NLT wall, that becomes your floor slab, and you've kept the heritage aspect of the house. So there's another application that could be hybrid, and great to see these different applications. We even also have another passive house CLT in West Vancouver. So it's great to see these test cases that, you know, really inspire us to then go big and go home. We are off to, I think we had Scott. So I think it's Derek's turn. Derek, you had 2 questions, I believe. And like always, how's China today?
How's China? I'm in the middle of the concrete jungle. I feel bad almost during this presentation.
I was kind of saving things for Derek just because I thought you would get to that point.
Yeah. I mean, it's, you know, I've been here, 4 years now, and I've seen 2 house fires. 2 apartment fires, and it was interesting to watch. I think in my life I've seen maybe 4 house fires altogether, and then I was in a big campus, and so I actually had to have live fire training. So when you were talking about like the experience of having that fire in front of you, I do know exactly what you were talking about. I've had to put those kinds of sample fires out, and but it seems like the construction technique and the design of the building can lend a lot to the safety of it. That's why I was wondering, and I asked the questions about the hybrid buildings where it's got a concrete core of some kind, essentially like a safe haven in a way for 2 stairwells for people to get out, because that's used here a lot of times. You don't have just one escape path. You've got multiple escape paths for these tall buildings. But I also had a question about the different types of risk mitigation. If you're reducing the number of electrical fires, for example, and passive houses in general have like fewer holes, if that, I can think of it that way, right? I mean, you've got, did that contribute to reduction in the amount of veracity of fires? I'm just wondering about how the design is helping mitigate the fire risk.
Well, that's a good question, Derek. And it's amazing to think of you in China right now as you're talking. So thank you for sharing your background and environment. I guess it's like 6 a.m. or something there. That's awesome. But
yeah, it's in the morning.
Yeah, exactly. I can't really speak. I mean, boy, it's a big question about what are we doing in our construction of single family houses to prevent against fire, I believe was the question. But I can tell you a lot about the larger buildings because that's what the codes were primarily revolving around, was the life safety aspects of mass timber buildings and the mitigations that we had to go to and are continuing to go through to define those mitigation elements for taller buildings. In a house, I mean, it's a 1-story, 2-story building, and of course we have smart fire alarms, et cetera, smoke alarms. But it's really, in some ways, so many ways, a safer environment than a light wood frame building because of this massive material that if you ever tried to strike a match against this, it's not going to go very far. So I don't want to make light of it, but that's why the codes are not very stringent at that level for single family homes. And it was one of the reasons we were able to get this permitted through the city of Seattle quite easily, because it wasn't really regulated that much for fire life safety issues. So I don't know if I really answered your question, Derek, but if you want to ask it again, feel free.
It was just to do with, I know the fire safety people, they put these constraints around things. And I understand it. Like they were saying, well, all these other devices have failed. The smoke systems have failed, the sprinkler systems have failed, everything. And that does happen. But, the architecture can lend itself quite a bit to the safety options. We look at the Twin Tower problem, that the architecture of the building contributed in some ways to the collapse of the building. Granted, that's an extreme case, of course, and we shouldn't be always designing for extremes. But it just seems like, in Passive House, we solve so many problems because of the way we design it, architect's creativity and the way you design a building that helps them solve many, many problems. And I'm just wondering if, Passive House in particular, because of fewer openings and materials that are used, et cetera, can convince people that, we're really reducing the risk of the effects of the fire damage to, put firefighters at harm.
I would like to be able to say we convinced them, but I don't think that we did, Derek. I talked to firefighters in New York City about this question. I presented to the New York City Fire Department. It was one of the most terrifying presentations I've ever given. I talked to the Tokyo Fire Chief Brigade in Tokyo. Like not quite as terrifying as the New Yorkers, but it was it's a very emotional subject. I mean, people's lives are on the line, and your life as a fire person is on the line. And so, you know, that these are real issues to be grappled with, and they're very vivid and visceral. And the common person in the street, you know, everyday average person just understands immediately what it would be like to be inside of a building burning building. And so we have to deal with that, because, you know, as architects, we are responsible for the health, safety, and welfare of our clients and our buildings, and this is a part of it. So I was convinced reluctantly to take it pretty seriously, and we took it as seriously as we can, and we still are. These fire tests going on in Sweden are absolutely inspiring and terrifying at the same time. And what's really terrifying is how vivid and bright and strong and active they get in that compartment. And it's just in the compartment. If we can contain the fire to the compartment, that's the goal. And even the firefighters will acknowledge that. And that's what's been so inspiring, is that the structure remains, the fire is contained in the compartment. And what you have left is 1.5 inches of char all around the edges that got burned. And that's it. It's pretty amazing.
Excellent. Derek, are you good? I know you had about 3 questions in the chat, so just want to make sure.
Oh, yeah, no, I'm fine. Thank you.
Again, thank you for the update from China. Again, I appreciate it every week. Again. So Scott, we're going to come back to you. You had a question, another question.
Yeah, the question was related to the connections on these panels and the fire resistance of the connections, because I've seen that come up a few times, and just curious as to what the results are, those kind of things.
Yeah, that's a great question, Scott. And this again is something that I'm constantly learning about. The little connections that we use for our house are those little tiny Simpson straps, and they're, you know, super thin kind of galvanized metal steel connections, and they're pretty simple, as I described. But the connections between these beams and the columns and the panels of the ceiling and the panels themselves are a whole nother technology, and it's a really exciting one that is led by Mightycom or Riacom work. And there's some really interesting connectors that are a whole industry has been developed around them. And you can tell I can't quite speak as knowledgeably about them, which I'm very humble about, but happy to, you know, put you in contact with some of those folks that are doing it. There's a tremendous amount of research and R&D and development in these areas. All of those companies were very much involved in the mass timber code evolution of those codes, because they knew that the fire protection of those typically steel, sometimes aluminum connections were going to be critical for the success. Ironically, one of the things that's often repeated in the code world is that there needs to be a fire rating over the steel or aluminum connections. And oftentimes it's wood that is used as the blocking element once you can use as a combustible element. At the same time, you have to, of course, meet the 1, 2, 3 hour connection, you know, rating there. But it's a pretty funny situation when you think about it. After all the effort we're going against mass timber, when sometimes wood can be used as the protection area.
Yeah, thank you.
Just Rachel's got a question, and I know Ian's done a great job of talking about different products in the chat, but Rachel, you can come on and ask a question.
Yeah, I know that you can obviously cover CLT with drywall and stuff, but for people that don't, when you look at CLT interiors, often it's like CLT ceiling, CLT wall, sometimes like the millwork looks like a similar finish, and it can be quite overwhelming. So for people who are wondering how to finish the CLT but not necessarily use a drywall, are there options for like painting or staining a CLT?
Absolutely, Rachel. Yeah. This whole wall behind me is all stained. It's a 3-step process. And I didn't want to get that kind of really rich, deep red, knotty pine quality that happens in older pine buildings over time. And I wanted to be really careful because the product darkens, you know, it's just wood. And if you've ever had a piece of wood just in the sunlight, all the samples that we got from 6 or 7, 8 years ago from Structure Lamb up in Canada, they've all darkened significantly in a way that you can really tell. And for me, it's not really that appealing. So we were really careful to paint to seal the wood, and then also apply a UV sealer against ultraviolet rays, and as well use a light wash whitewash against the walls. And that was enabled to just lightened up everything. We didn't do it, for instance, on the floor. And you can see, I'm looking at a spot right now where we've had a piece of some books sitting for some time, and it does darken rather quickly over time. Within the first year, it darkened more than I would have liked. So I would highly recommend at least a UV sealer, and then as well, potentially a light whitewash, depending on what you were looking at. And if you wanted to go all, I mean, there's nothing to prevent, you can paint the whole, you could paint it black, you could paint it red, you can paint it blue, you know, whatever your heart desires.
And can you specify the the species of that finish material, or is it typically like the same type?
So the finished material on the CLT that's typically produced in North America is not a separate finished material. It is the structural material. It's a 2x4, 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 2x6, 2x8, etc. It's a 2x product. And so what you have on the outside is just the face of those 2x products that's exposed. You can, depending on your manufacturer, you can work with different wood species. So you can work with, typically in the Northwest anyway, Douglas fir, a mix called SPF. It's called spruce, pine, and fir, and they don't really distinguish between the two. There's a little bit of hemlock that's being tested with in Eastern Canada. Nordic Lamb uses the Eastern white pine, and then in Southern Eastern, the Southern yellow pine is the species that's used. And in Europe, there's other manufacturers, other types of wood that are used there. And that's what I think is one of the really beautiful concepts, is that it really does embody the character of the local forests, and because that's where the wood comes from.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, Rachel, a lot of different manufacturers, and I think even Structural Lime just announced last week that they've got a yellow cedar finish that they're now be able to do. So again, reach out to your local mass timber company and pick your species, because it's pretty amazing. I know Structure Craft with their DLT, they've got like 12 different options, so it's pretty amazing. Okay, Chris Ham had a question. Susan, sorry, just how you doing? I got like 5 more questions, and I'm sure there'll be a few more. All right. Okay, Chris.
No, that's awesome. Thanks, John. Thanks for asking.
Well, I just been in love with this whole conversation, so I didn't want to stop you, but I thought it'd be nice because it's been on fire. So
appreciate it, John.
Yeah, Susan, I appreciate. Thanks for staying on so long. Thanks, John. So first of all, thank you so much. This was such a great presentation. Actually, I'm in the passive house world in New York City, and I've just been very excited about mass timber recently, and bought your book last week and was reading it, and then I saw the presentation today. I was extremely excited.
Awesome.
But yeah, thanks. So you mentioned that you thought kind of 8 to 12 stories in towns in the U.S. is probably going to be the sweet spot, you would think, for mass timber, and you know, in the coming years. And so I was just curious, like, what do you think is going to be the biggest obstacle over the next, I don't know, 5 to 10 years to mass timber being adopted more, especially in towns? I know that, of course, a lot of the U.S. still needs to adopt, you know, IBC 2021 and whatnot. But maybe putting that aside, I don't know if you would think that that's probably the biggest impediment. But you know, is it awareness? Is it lack of designer experience, or supply chain or cost? You know, I'm just curious what your thoughts are.
That's a great question, Chris. I think it's a combination of all those things that you mentioned, and probably if I had to focus on one, it's just the pure beauty of having the right team together is so magical on this. It takes a tremendous amount of integrated design work vertically to begin to work from owner to city officials, code officials, to architects, to the structural engineer, one of the most critical team players, to the contractor who buys into this. And when you have that magical moment where all of those parties are focused on doing their job and focused on getting that building built, we flew through the entitlement process. We are, knock on wood, be careful, but we're really flying through that design process and the whole entire design and pre-construction process right now. Now, we haven't pulled the trigger on it, of course, And I really shouldn't jinx this project, but it's a very exciting thing to have that team where you have fire protection engineers and structural engineers and architects and code officials and owners even contributing in this conversation. Contractors, you know, like if we have to protect the gyp here, then how are we gonna sequence that in the field? And that's going into my schematic design drawings to begin to, you know, understand that wall section and that wall thickness that's based on information from the fire protection engineers saying, you know, you don't need it or you do need it, and what the caulking is gonna be like and what that cost implication is going to be. We're in a really new industry. And I think I really underestimated, you know, I kind of thought it was all about this house, and, you know, that was a new thing for me, and maybe it was just my issue, but I didn't realize how new it really was. And when you begin to talk about changing large AEC construction, engineering, architecture, industry norms and parameters, people get they have two reactions, you know, they're early adopters and they're really excited, or they put up all kinds of roadblocks and barriers. Oh, it's going to cost too much, and that's going to cost too much. And I'm seeing kind of two trains of design teams, and I mean the engineers and contractors in that whole group, kind of spreading out. And there's a bunch of them that are just, hey, you guys go figure it out. I'll see you in 5 years. And when you got it all figured out, happy to go join and, you know, follow the rules and do it right. Obviously, that's not where my practice is reigned, and that's not what my aspirations are. My aspirations are to bring change to this industry and to bring a more sustainable carbon footprint to this incredible opportunity that we have in front of us. So it's been a focus of my passion, as you can tell.
Very cool. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris.
Susan, I almost would let you go with the big mic drop there, but we have more questions. But we love your passion and love that you want to change the world. And as you can tell, there's a whole bunch of people here today that just support you and are riding the train with you. So thank you for being leader.
Thank you, Sean. And thank you to all of you for doing what you're doing. Everybody's on this call is doing their part of that.
Yeah. So Peter M. Molnar, I forgot you. So if you're still there, I know you had a question. And again, I always enjoy Peter coming on because his initials are PH. So I always call him PH Molnar from Oshawa. Peter, you still there? Oh, did I?
Yes, I am.
Oh,
hello.
there you are. Good. Thank you.
Sure. I'll put video up. Yeah, I was just commenting on the demising walls in wood construction, CLTs. And it's the Shoshone ban effect if it goes to fire. My remark was that I lived in a concrete high rise it had 12 apartments per floor. I was on the 7th floor. The neighboring apartment burned out completely, scorched black, light on, you couldn't see anything anyways. That the intermediate wall just was warm to the touch, and it just didn't affect my apartment. And it just burned out completely. It was contained within. Would the same thing happen with wood construction?
Absolutely. That's what we were just talking about, Peter. When we say compartment fire, that's what that means. It's a fire that stays in the compartment that's, you know, that's separate. And, you know, I mean, this is not a new concept. This is what a 1 hour resistant fire rating is, a 2 hour, 3 hour, et cetera.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter for the material as long as it's been tested to meet those requirements and to really test that they can truly do that. Yeah. And so what you're seeing now in the industry is a series of mass timber manufacturers are having their glulam column to beam connections tested to CLT panel connected, you know, and those are all being tested on a series of closely held fabricator tests. But these broader tests that we're running through the USDA are really about those compartment tests and pushing things to the limit. Like I said, with no sprinklers assumed as being able to work in those environments. And the more tests, the more repeatability. You know, I'm not a fire scientist, but it is amazing talking to these guys across the world. And you know, well, it'd be really interesting if we did this little nuance or that little nuance. And I'm just saying, no, take off the 30-40% more of that gypsum wallboard and expose that wood and see what happens, because we have to get to a point where we can feel safe and assured and confident that this wood can stand up to any fire, and those fires that we tested against are the biggest and the baddest of the bunch.
Well, in your testing, it was my other remark on the chat, was that in that conference that you presented your information to the firefighting community, fire safety, if they would know or maybe they do know enough about Shoshogiban and how it limits and stops burning beyond a certain point. They might be more amenable to wood structures. Can you convince them?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And the Shoshogiban is a great technique. It's often used on as the exterior of buildings.
Yeah.
And so a lot of these fires are assuming that the greatest fire hazard is the occupant. It's you and me, Peter. And so, you know, that's what typically it happens inside. And then you want to contain it inside that compartment. So it doesn't, even if it goes out the windows and it goes up the exterior facade, it doesn't, you know, spread to the neighboring property. That's of course the big nightmare, as we saw for the forest fires this years.
Oh yeah.
But so it's really, Shoshogiban is a great little, it's a great, I mean, I used it in my house, I love it, but it's not necessarily going to supplant the need for real full-scale testing. And that's what I heard again and again from this fire community, was that we want to see real full-scale with structural loading on the top. And, you know, again, this huge fuel load, you know, it's not just a little match in the corner, it's setting on fire a whole closet full of clothes stuffed to the brink. They're all made out of polyester and petroleum products that just go up like a gasoline fire, which is really what this with our modern, you know, IKEA type of petroleum-based furnishings. The fires are very different than they were. And this is going back to Bronwyn's question about the European fire. You know, Americans are typically buying more and more petroleum-based products, even in their interior furnishings and their clothing. There is a little bit of a difference, not a lot anymore culturally, but some between some of the European contents and the American contents. So I'm told, but I'm getting a little geeky on that subject too.
Well, no, but it is those nuances. In a testing facility, they cannot entirely replicate the day-to-day normal, as you said, room loading or structural failures that may occur with the intense fires that may spring up with the interior furnishings of a typical household or a multi-level building.
I beg to differ, Peter. We did replicate the structural loading. We did replicate the fuel load on the interiors, and we did replicate the materiality of it. So and the ventilation. Okay. So we were really but that took, to write that fire protocol, the fire protocol, to design that test, took at least a year out of that whole process. And it was obviously a very collaborative process. You know, people like myself weren't taking any of those issues seriously until I was convinced otherwise. And then we ended up doing pretty much exactly what the fire community wanted. And that was the only way we could convince them, was to do exactly what they wanted with every single barrier they could think of to put up in our way. We'll do it. And the test still passed. So it took a while for me to accept, but it worked in the end.
Good for you. Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you, Peter, for your interest.
Yeah, good questions, everyone. We still got a few more, but again, we're 15 minutes at the top of the hour, and I know my wife is going to be coming in for dinner because I can tell there's a party with my new nephew outside. So firing through the questions, David Wootton. David, correct me on your last name.
Watton.
Thank you.
Like rotten with a W.
All right.
So, Susan, thank you very much. I'll try to keep this quick because I know it's getting late. I might have missed it in the presentation. There was a lot of numbers, but do you have like a carbon embodiment per square foot of CLT, something that could be used for rough estimations, like just rule of thumb?
That's a really good question, David. I don't. I think I can put you in touch, though, with some people who can get you that number. And of course, it is different for hemlock versus Doug fir versus everything. But like I say, I'm not an LCA expert, and I don't claim to be, but I do know some of the best in the country. So I'm happy to put you in touch with Maureen Putnam of Quorum, or Indranil Ganguly from the University of Washington, or Hongmei Gu from the Forest Products Laboratory. Those were the three scientists. Francesca Pierbon from the UW as well. Some really great people who have helped educate me about the LCA issues for the product for mass timber.
Okay, that would be great if I couldn't write that fast, but
no worries. David, I'm just putting into the chat materials palette. Again, Architectural 2030, they've got some great stuff. Hopefully the link I just sent you might get you started with that. But again, Susan's right. It is wood dependent. Depends on how many layers you're doing. And of course, then it also, if you include the shipping, if you're using European product versus North American product, all that stuff. But me being, you know, again, for those who don't know me, I have a degree in wood products processing at UBC. So I love this conversation all day, because like we need to be doing this. I got to see CLT in 2004 when I got to go to Europe, and I tried to do or bring it to Canada. And again, it was competing with a lot of mass or concrete towers and developers. And so it's getting great to see that we're finally getting mass timber passive houses up to these scales. So
Can I throw one little thing out to you, maybe Sean or Susan, just a thought. You said that your house was 8% more or whatever, but could you ever backwards calculate it and see what that would cost per ton of carbon? If you're embodying carbon, if there's a price on carbon, what would that offset be? So if in the world
Totally
of a
could,
carbon,
David. I mean, that's what's really exciting about this material, is it's very quantifiable. We were even able to take, you know, how many trees did it take to build this house, and how much acreage would it need to grow those trees, and it's an amazingly quantifiable material. And I spent a lot of time with my students looking at some of those quantifications, but as you're pointing out, there's some really good ones that's left out there, and maybe you should get into that world.
yeah, I do some of that work. But anyways, I'll let other people answer your question. Thank you very much.
No, great stuff, everyone. Tom and Tom, I know your question has been chatted away here between Ian and Jeff Spratos, and I know Jeff is probably, I haven't seen him screen yet, but I'm sure he's been smiling all evening because he loves this stuff as well. So
I know he has been. Susan, I'm sympathizing with all the pain from your code work. As an architect who spent the last decade in New York City in the mayor's office dealing with construction code changes, I have witnessed a building commissioner smack the table and get up and walk out of the room in the middle of a discussion with the fire department's code representative as they were going through an evolution of the New York City fire code. And all he would say was to the building code officials, well, you'll get building code people were asking for collaboration because we had to coordinate all the codes. Mm-hmm. And the fire official was saying, yeah, you'll get a copy when we're done.
Right.
And, it's, they always throw the think of the burning babies card, and we just sit there looking awful. So I sympathize with that. I have been fighting that fight, and I'm still doing that. Also looking at, and I don't understand why the fire prevention, the fire department guys are not freaking out about all of the chemicals that are in fire retardants that cause them to choke to death, even though they're not actually preventing any fire. So that's a different side. That's a side issue. The other thing that Jeff Spiritos and I have butted heads about for, Jeff, how long? Like 4 or 5 years now, is heavy timber has been in the construction code, in the building code, for a very, very long time. And I, as an architect who is jazzed about all of this, still have to look at, there is a difference between a laminated product, which is, has a significant proportion of glue, versus a homogeneous piece of wood, and, how it behaves in a fire. Mm-hmm. So I'd be really happy to be pointed to the science, and the study about the comparative performance and the behavior of these two materials with each other side by side.
Well, that's a great question, Jeff. And one of the things to keep in, first of all, I don't have a great source for you on that particular issue, but I do have some wisdom that I've learned about mass timber panels, especially the cross-laminated timber panels. And they are cross-laminated timber panels. So when you compare it to a heavy timber panel, which is, it's heavy timber is just one solid piece of wood with all of its inherent structural qualities. But when you begin to overlap them and cross in perpendicular ways, their structural properties actually are much more helpful. And there are more dormant layers in between. That's why it's an odd layer, as you probably know. And there's more structural layers on the exterior. And regarding so first of all, it's a little bit, it is an apples to oranges comparison. They are different products. They do share that thick flammability quality that the all wood products do have, however. But your point about the glue inherent in those areas is a good one. And one of the things that we looked at really carefully in the fire tests is when after it really took 3 hours and 15 minutes in all cases to burn through even the beginning of that first laminate, which is a 2x product. So it's 1.5 inches, as you know. And so you burn about through that. And then there's a little bit of an uptick in all of the fire relationships we did. We had hundreds and hundreds of sensors embedded inside the CLT, inside the walls, inside the ceiling, inside the different layers of those panels. And when the fire hits that second laminate around the glue area of that after that first laminate burns mostly away, there is an uptick of temperature, and I'm happy to share all those fire reports are all public information, and there is an uptick, and in some cases it causes an extra burning of the area around in the second laminate. Now, if that were have to continued and gone on and spread more widely, that would have been a big problem for mass timber panels. But it didn't, and it really withheld that barrier. And it does typically burn about 1/4 inch in that 4-hour period. It burns about 1/4 inch of that second laminate. And that's why the structural loading capacities are really critical. So it burns, I can show you, there's some great pictures in that first test that we did at NIST in 2017, where you see the first layer burned away and a little bit of that second layer, and the glue's already burned away by that point because it's gone through. But the experience from the tests was that it really did not make it was not a huge contributor to the flammability or not of this material. In the end, it was a tiny uptick.
Okay. As a follow-on, what about the smoke propagation and chemicals released with the burning of the glue?
Well, I can't speak to the chemical. I mean, I don't have any, we didn't do any, toxicity tests of that. I mean, the glue is a pretty commonplace glue, and there's different kinds of glue. There's a melamine glue, there's a polyurethane glue, which is the majority of the panels are made out of that. And there's a new generation of glues, of the polyurethane glues, called the PURX. They've been used in the industry for decades, in the glue lam industry. And so this product has been around for a long time. We did, as an industry, way back when, before mass timber CLT ever really got involved, we were pulling away from any urea formaldehyde use. These are non-UF glues, which are the most potent and the most toxic of some of those earlier glues. But again, none of the mass timber panels that I know have had any use of those urea UF glues, with the exception of the melamine, and they're in an inert state, as you probably know. So they are pretty safe in terms of all of the things that we put into our built environment, and I mean it by these petroleum products, in contributing to our furniture, et cetera. They're pretty severe elements of toxicity there. And that's actually the more critical thing, is not the burning of the adhesives, but actually the burning of the contents in our interior environments. Given, you've got a lot of stone in your background, a little bit of wood, and a nice bouquet of daisies back there. But a lot of us have foam mattresses and spandex clothes and that kind of stuff that really, once set on fire, releases incredibly toxic and fast burning gasoline fires, which are really dangerous. Much more so than the layer of glue in here.
And Tom, you win the virtual background tonight because you got us to hang out with Mr. Kaufman's office in Falling Water, which is my favorite home in North America. So beautiful background.
I'm actually in one of the bedrooms, Sean. So, but you called it. Good for you.
But that piece of furniture behind you with that window pops in, I got to see it at the Pittsburgh Passive House conference 2 years ago, and we made an attempt, and it was a bit of a homage for me, and it was great. I know Jeff Spiritos wants to say 1,000 things, but we have 2 minutes left. Jeff, I owe you. We know you're the man, and I also know that you're a happy camper. And I almost think that, Susan, we should be bringing on like a structural engineer that is looking at some of these passive house mass timber towers to talk about some of the discussions that you were highlighting on, because I know that one in Portland had really cool mechanics and unfortunately get used. I know it took off from the Christchurch projects down there. So I think that could be someone we could target to come back and have a conversation. I've got about a minute left before we go, but I know that I was teasing Nathan about his lovely Kraken hockey team. He had I think a quick question, and then I think we have to wrap it up before my wife starts banging on the door. Nathan, are you still there?
Yeah, well, here I am. Hi, Susan. Great to see you again.
Hey, Nathan, good to see you. Yeah.
Go Kraken.
Go Kraken, exactly. Kraken fan, that's cool.
Yeah, so I was asking about, did you use a very rigid insulation and do long screws through your insulation for the perfect wall, or do you use something else to hold that?
We used really long screws from Small Planet Supply that Albert brought in from Germany, and you can get them through 475 as well, especially on the East Coast. And yeah, but we also use Roxel and mineral wool, rock wool on the exterior. We used 6.5 inches in 2-inch bats, and we got a pretty good R rating. I was pretty proud of it.
Well, when you consider the fire resistivity of rock wool and your mass timber, you could literally forest fire be damned.
Pretty much, and I've got a metal roof on top of it. No, I was talking to some folks down in the Santa Rosa area who are rebuilding their house after one of the fires. I'm not sure if I would advise that personally, but they're rebuilding it right in the same lot, et cetera. And they're doing they're following what's called the WUI guidelines, the Wildlife Urban Interface Guidelines, which are a new set of codes that are being developed and crafted. And they've been around for a while, but they're being hyper realized and brought back to the design industry down in that area, because it's just really critical if you're going to build in that area, sadly, in my mind. Yeah.
Sounds pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Great to see you, Kraken fan.
Yeah. I look forward to the Canucks doing a road trip when we can. Just another little plug here again is wood fiber insulation will work similar to the mass timber, and now that we're seeing more of it across North America, that could be another product in case rock wool is not your preference. Again, I know I'm a bit biased because
awesome. We love it, and it's but it's not going to work for the taller buildings if it's used on the exterior of the exterior wall of the mass timber wall, because that does need to be no combustible materials outside the exterior face of the exterior wall, except for the waterproofing barrier.
Absolutely, but we're also working on something else, Susan. So we'll get back to you in a year or two after we've done some more testing with some stuff we're doing.
Cool.
Zach, you get to wrap it up, my friend.
Well, it's not exactly a wrap up. It's an important question, because this is an example of a Q&A that it's just fantastic. Thank you, Susan. And our policy, I'm polling the audience, and I just included my email in the chat. Our policy has been to only publish the Q&A for the happy hour portion of the session, and not the after hour, because in some iterations, the happy hour, the after hour has become more of just a kind of free-flowing conversation, and it's felt kind of intimate. But in this case, we've continued the entire after hour with questions from Susan that have been fantastic, and we don't want to lose the value that has been kind of imbued into the chat. So I would love, and we're working with Jeffrey Roden to publish these chats. I would love to be able to publish the chat for the full 2 hours. So if you have an issue with that and any privacy concerns or anything like that, please email me. I've included my email, zach@passivhausaccelerator.com. Otherwise, we're going to assume that it's cool for us to share it, because this is just gold. Thank you.
It is gold, and I just, for those that haven't been to the few happy hours and after hours, Prudence gave us some homework We didn't get into it because Susan just had so many amazing questions, and I just didn't want to stop this. But at some point, we will be coming back to dive into a little bit of homework of just what else could we be doing individually with our families and everything else to just take this all to the next level. So I put in those 5 homework points that Prudence came with. So hopefully you can have a look at that. And lastly, if you haven't seen David Attenborough's show, Life on a Planet, I also recommend you do that homework, only because Prince William has now come out with the Earth Shot. And so if you want to save the planet, you can actually work on £1 million you could be awarded for your clever idea. So it's pretty cool that, you know, the royal family is taking a point into climate action. So it's pretty cool. All right, we're 4 minutes over. I can hear the footsteps. Susan, I thank you so much for this amazing night. I would love to one day come down to Seattle and have tea or coffee in that amazing home. Again,
You can get across the border and not be socially distanced. You're welcome anytime, Sean.
I'll wait to 2022 if I have to. But again, hopefully, put it this way, I'll take you to a Kraken game. You take me for dinner at your house, and then Nathan can hang outside with his jersey on and heckle me for coming down. So
that's awesome. Thank you so much, everybody. It's been great to hang with you.
Good night, everybody. See
Thanks,
you next
Susan.
week.
Thank you
Good
both
night,
for the
everyone.
Seahawks game. That'd be more fun.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah.
Bye, Nathan.
Night.
Thank you. Bye.
Good night.